Hello everybody and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle. I've got a really fun episode for you guys today. Something that I really like doing every month. At the end of each month, I'm doing this thing I call New Music Shuffle, where I basically talk about the major albums that I enjoyed throughout the month, that I didn't really spotlight or feature in a major review, and that I really think you guys would love and I want to recommend. So here we go. I'm going to try to go through these fairly quick because there's quite a few of them and I don't want the video to be too over long, so the idea is to kind of do shorter style reviews for these and just to give you an impression of if it's something that you'll enjoy or not. So let's get into it and see what we got on the docket today. First, I want to talk about Rosalie Cunningham and her album Two Piece Puzzle. This is crossover prog from the UK. You know, there's kind of elements of psychedelic rock, of, you know, a little bit of kind of old school prog rock as well in the mix. It kind of reminds me of the style of like the late 60s, early 70s. And it's really interesting and well done. It almost feels like it could be plucked out of that era because the production and sound design, I think, is developed to kind of give you that feel of this kind of old school vibe to the record. And I think that really works to its benefit. So you've got a lot of influence from things like the Beatles or early Pink Floyd or David Bowie in that earlier period, maybe early even Genesis and Black Sabbath in the mix here. Rosalie Cunningham is just a great artist. She was in the band Person, which was a great psych band that did a lot of this style music as well, but now she's doing this on her own, and she's a multi-instrumentalist, does a lot of the different instruments on this record, and is just kind of a powerhouse in the prog world, and just a new artist to me that I didn't know about and has been really impressing me with this release. Just really cool, like throwback style, like I said, and not just the psychedelic and proggy stuff, but I feel like there's influences from like folk and jazz and pop of the day, and, you know, some more disparate influences from like Eastern culture and things like that to really provide a very varied and interesting album full of different influences and inspiration. I really like just even the opening, like there's kind of this instrumental, cool psychedelic prog opening with some organ and vintage late 60s sounds, leading into this Donovan kind of two-parter story, which is really cool. High energy singer-songwriter piece. Almost some of the tracks have this kind of almost sea shanty style flavor. There's a little bit of saxophone, and violin also comes in the mix in Donnie Part 2. Makes me think a little bit even of Queen and some like Brian May style guitar. There's some spoken word piece with The War, moving into another great track from the album Duet, where it's kind of this vocal duet with Roscoe Wilson, who's her partner both musically and in life, I believe. There's kind of this like carnival vaudevillian kind of style, almost like a mixture of like Lady Madonna meets For the Benefit of Being Mr. Kite. Some great fuzzed out guitars. Tristiata Amnesia is a raga rock inspired song with some sitar kind of sounds, and really settles into a good funky groove with more fuzzy guitar, and just continues on from there with some really great confident swagger from Rosalie Cunningham, some of that early rock feel, some cool heavier riffs and stuff like Suck, Push, Bang, Blow, and liner notes is a really cool jazzy vibe that's really welcome at this point in the album, and really some groovy cool vibes and a bouncy poppy Beatles feel. So just really cool stuff, and some great bonus tracks in number 149 and Fossil Song that really continue in this vein. So a really strong album. Rosalie Cunningham, like I said, is just a powerhouse and does all these different instruments throughout the record. You know, get some help from the drums and some violin work from Rick Sanders, but beyond that, a lot of this is just her doing the guitars, the bass, the Hammond organ, piano, mellotron, percussion, and just her incredible vocals as well. Just a really cool, awesome release that I really recommend to all of you. I think it's a really cool one that's worth checking out for all fans of this style of kind of early 70s, late 60s kind of psychedelic rock with some prog tinges to it. Next, I want to talk about, kind of on a different lane from that, is the new Tears for Fears album, The Tipping Point. This is a big return for the group from a pretty long hiatus. It's been about 17 years since their last album, which was kind of an album that was a reuniting of the group at the time as well, because they had several albums that were basically during this kind of split between the two main guys in the group, Roland Orzabal and Kurt Smith. But now we've got them together, combining their powers to create a really great pop record that I wanted to recommend. And of course, my channel is more prog-centric, so this is a bit more poppy than I usually get into. But I think it's really worth talking about because they have some proggy influences in there, and a lot of people I've found that like prog music tend to like this group and tend to like this kind of poppier sound from them. So I think it's a really good album that's worth checking out, especially if you like kind of the Beatles inspired pop and 80s synth inspired pop. It's kind of the marriage of those worlds to me, of this like kind of Beatles backbone inspiration, you know, with the harmonies and with some of the song construction and vibe, but it's rooted in that kind of 80s synth style that they're known for from their big albums, you know, songs from The Big Chair and The Hurting that came out in the 80s. I'm not really a big historian of Tears for Fears. I don't really know their catalog very well. I've been kind of discovering it based on the release of this new album. I've seen like a lot of people talking about the band and talking about their catalog, and I've been kind of listening and doing listen through of a smattering of different pieces from their catalog, and it's been a fun journey. And I think this album is just right in line with all of the great music that I've been hearing throughout their catalog. It's really great pop hooks and melodies, great quality in the songwriting. I love No Small Thing that opens the record, has that Beatles vibe to it, almost kind of an homage to I Want You at the, you know, towards the middle. One of my favorites on the record. I love the opening acoustic bit, and just it goes in a fantastic direction. The Tipping Point, the title track, is probably one of the more straightforward pop numbers on the record, kind of very much in line with Everybody Wants to Rule the World. Kind of has a similar feel and style to it, but it's such an earworm and such a catchy song that I kind of forgive it for being really in line with their past sound. I love Rivers of Mercy, a great, warm, spiritual, and serene track. Beautiful, sweet vocals over beautiful piano lines and light acoustic guitar. Just a very big highlight on the record. Just a great pop ballad that's really beautifully done. And I also really love Master Plan. Kind of has this Baroque pop kind of feel to it with definite Beatles influences, almost because-like harmonies in the mix. And I just really appreciate that. And they do some different things. They do some kind of upbeat, kind of 80s dance style stuff, like with Break the Man, even with End of Night as well, and some maybe even more electronic, kind of industrial EDM style vibes, like in My Demons. But they still keep that sense of melody and beauty. And the writing is just really fantastic, and it's catchy, but with a bit more development and intelligence, you know, than your standard kind of bubblegum pop stuff you might hear. You know, there's more in the musicianship and more that they're doing that's creative and clever. And so I really think it's a worthy listen for a prog fan who's looking for something a bit more catchy with some pop hooks. So that was one that stood out to me, something I definitely recommend to you guys who like that kind of thing. Next, kind of in a totally different lane, is the new album from Kalle Wallner called Voices. Betrayed, they left me for dead. This is heavier prog from Germany. Kalle Wallner is the guitarist and composer for RPWL and Blind Ego. So two kind of more harder edged, you know, modern kind of bands. At least Blind Ego is a little harder edge. I think RPWL is more maybe Pink Floyd kind of inspired, a little bit more, you know, laid back and atmospheric in their style. But he's an incredible guitarist who, you know, that kind of typifies the style here, is that he's able to kind of give these David Gilmour-esque, like really beautiful guitar solos, but also is able to give some heavy riffs that really bring a lot of meat and heaviness and stuff to the table here. So it's a great balance of those two worlds. There's an ear for melody and for hooks, but also some intricate, interesting, heavier things as well. So the album is mostly instrumental, and it's kind of structured, just each track is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So they're just numbered tracks, and the only track that really has major vocal like lyrics is 3. which has some great vocals from Arno Mincies from Subsignal. Really beautiful and a welcome kind of break from the purely instrumental stuff that surrounds it, which I like as well. All the instrumentals are really interesting. They stay varied and have a lot to them. There's some burbling synth in one that starts before the riff rolls in. It sounds very modern and fresh. I like the production here. 2 is a bit heavier and crunchier hard rock. But there are moments that are lighter and more acoustic. I think there's a good balance and blend here between the heavier and the lighter sides of the sound. And it just continues on from there. 5 is a fast-paced rocker, kind of reminding me of like the heavier works of Steven Wilson and later Porcupine Tree. Once again, more tasteful soloing from Kalle Wallner. 6 is one of the more longer pieces. They kind of end with 2 of the longer pieces that give more time to breathe and to have a lot more depth and a lot more these slow kind of builds to them, and I really like that as well. And 7 Out just kind of is a heavenly piece that builds with more beautiful guitar majesty, kind of encapsulating everything that came before it. So a great lineup here. Kalle Wallner takes on all the guitars, of course, but there's some guests here. Marco Miniman plays drums. Like I mentioned, Arno Mincies from Subsignal on vocals on track 3. And then Yogi Lang, who plays with him in some of his other groups, on keyboards. So really a cool vibe here that I wanted to highlight. One that maybe have fell through the cracks a bit for some people, but it's a really great instrumental, mostly instrumental, prog guitar album with a lot of cool hooks and melodies. Some heavier edge to it, but also some lighter, more atmospheric sections. I think it's really well balanced and a definite highlight for this year. Next, I want to get into an album that I've heard several people kind of request my thoughts about. It's one that I think has captured a lot of listeners, especially those in the lane of like the big train style stuff that I tend to talk about. And so that the group is Tiger Moth Tales, and it's A Song of Spring is the name of the album. Tiger Moth Tales is basically the project of multi-instrumentalist Pete Jones, who's just a fantastic musician, plays like every instrument you could think of, has this like pure prog voice that's just one of the best in the business, and he guest spots on a lot of different prog albums and such, but he just has this great tone and this great vibe. It's like this great blend of the classic prog singers like Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins and things, but with kind of this more pop-centric kind of feel, like this buttery tone that just really complements that side and just gives this kind of magical quality to his voice that really captivates me, and I think he's just one of the best singers in the current prog landscape. I just think he has such talent there. And he did a bit of kind of pop stuff, I believe, before he really jumped headfirst into this prog world that he's been doing now. I believe he was on like a reality show as a singer, competing for a brief time on like the X Factor or something like that. But now he's embracing his prog heritage and really, really diving into this prog music. And I, as a prog fan, that's of course my bread and butter. I just really love that, and he just has such a joy to his music. It's just there's something really special and magical about what he does, and it really evokes the spirit of kind of this early Genesis kind of vibe to me, especially maybe not super early Genesis, but like Turk of the Tail, Wind and Wuthering kind of era Genesis, like kind of a whimsical style, kind of similar to things that they do with like very intricate storytelling with different characters and feels very English and just is really a fun harkening back to that kind of era that I think he really does super well. And his playing is impressive, that he's able to pull off all these different instruments, and he does all the writing, and it's a really cool style that I really appreciate. And he's just willing to embrace who he is as an artist. He doesn't worry about how people will perceive it, and I have to do things a certain way to appeal to a modern prog audience. No, I think he just kind of strips that away and just does what feels right to him, and the blend is great. There's these kind of beautiful ballads that are heartfelt and emotional, but then there's whimsical sections that are funny, that are almost comedic in their storytelling, and in the music itself has this kind of bouncy, funny quality to it that kind of brings in different styles and different instruments, and I think it creates for a really fun, engaging listen where you kind of bounce from thing to thing throughout each track, so you never get bored, you never feel like things are getting stale, because he's always switching it up into something new. The album starts with Spring Fever, which is great, upbeat and happy with that Genesis kind of trick of the tail sound. I love the poppy atmospheric bridge that comes in, some cool keyboard sounds. There's some sax in the mix. He plays sax really well, and that kind of pops up here and there on the album. Sounds like it could be a classic prog song that came out of like the maybe mid-70s period. Some quirky jazzy stuff towards the end. Just a really joyous kind of start to the album. This leads into Forester, which is more of a folky kind of acoustic flavor with some penny whistle sounds. Great vocals and sweet acoustic guitar. Great, outstanding harmony vocals. Really beautiful. Dance Till Death is one of the more unique, interesting songs on the record. That's a bit darker from what I'm used to hearing from Pete Jones, but it's really atmospheric and dark and hypnotic, and it continues in this same theme and style throughout. It adds a lot of color and darkness to the makes of the album, and because it's talking about a pretty dark subject matter about using a young child as a ritual sacrifice that has to dance till death. It's kind of based on Rites of Spring, which is a pretty dark kind of concept and work. The whole album is kind of basically evoking the different feels of spring, from the lighter, more happier feels of spring to this kind of darker story that takes place in spring based on Rites of Spring. So, but there's some great saxophone halfway through, and I love the instrumental kind of section at the end that just gets more and more intense as the dance continues, and just some great keyboard playing, and it's a really cool, different kind of track that's really recommended. One of the better tracks of the year for me. I think it's really unique and cool. And it moves from there. Holi is a great kind of Eastern world music kind of celebration based on the Hindu Festival of Light, with some kind of chanting vocals and Eastern inspired instruments. Mad March Hare is kind of that whimsical, bouncy, kind of funny feel to it that I was talking about, quirky, jazzy kind of sound. And I think he veers right on the line of like being whimsical but not too cheesy. It's almost there to like the too cheesy level at times for me, but he reins it back in with some great instrumentation and great storytelling to save it from being too over the top, I think. And I think that really is a great balance that kind of makes for a fun listen. And then it ends with, there's Rapa Nui, kind of a harder, driving, proggy song with some energetic drums and bass, some of the hardest rock that you hear on the album, I'd say. And then Light is a fantastic, beautiful ending that's just really epic in scope, and has this great Andy Latimer style. It is Andy Latimer playing guitar on it on a solo. Sounds almost like it could be one of the grand kind of finales from Big Big Train as well, with a little bit of like horns sounding off like a Big Train would do. But it's really a beautiful kind of transcendent ballad before the little kind of bonus hidden track that's like a funky kind of jazz fusion piece towards the end of the record. So really, like I said, a great, varied, interesting listen that I think really holds up, and I think it really shows Pete Jones really progressing in his style, and he's really doing well. This album plus Depths of Winter to me are some of his strongest work, and I think he's really developing in his style, and it's really fun to watch his rise as kind of this prog star. That is definitely a strong recommendation. Alright, another really strong recommendation that I had to talk about is Kite Parade and the album The Way Home, which I believe is kind of label mates with Tiger Moth Tales, so they kind of come together as a package here. I bought both of these albums kind of at the same time. They came out around the same time, so I linked them together in my brain. But Kite Parade is a new project from the mind of Andy Foster, an English multi-instrumentalist, and this is basically his baby, his album, with a lot of different kind of guest players as well. Nick DiVirgilio notably on drums, as well as Wishbone Ash's Joe Crabtree, along with some other musicians that he's working with here. And this one is right in my lane of that kind of progressive pop. Like I said, I was talking about Tears for Fears. To me, Tears for Fears is like the pop with the prog influence, and this to me is like the progressive rock with the pop influence, if that makes sense. This leans more into the prog wheelhouse. This isn't music you'd hear on radio or in a pop style playlist or something, but it definitely has very poppy hooks and melodies that really make it catchy and fun to listen to, and it's right in kind of that lane of It Bites. To me, that's the biggest touchstone in my mind, is It Bites, which does this really well back in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s period, but also the John Mitchell era of the group as well, that just has this tendency to write these really melodic, cool hooks, but add enough quirky, kind of proggy stuff around it that makes it more varied and interesting than just your standard pop music. This album is just such a joy to listen to. There's maybe even a little bit of that kind of Spock's Beard kind of flavor, which in their heyday are able to do kind of a similar thing of having this proggy music, but infusing it with this pop sensibility to make it catchy and hooky. And I really enjoy that. That's kind of some of the prog that I enjoy most, is this melodic kind of feel where there's these kind of singable choruses and catchy melodies that stick in your brain and are like earworms, but there's also some cool instrumentation that's more complex and intricate that's kind of balancing all of that out. I think it's a great blend of styles that I'm always looking out for and really excited to talk about. So this is just a blast of an album. I just totally recommend this wholeheartedly. Letting Go, that opens the album, is just the perfect slice of progressive pop with big synths and very pop sounding vocals with hooks galore. It has it all. It's a really fantastic track, one of my favorites of the year so far. Strip the Walls gets more into a heavier edge, some heavy guitar riffs and great driving rhythms. Kind of leads to a more lighter atmospheric breakdown in the middle with some 80s sounding keyboards and leading to a saxophone solo, which there's some sax peppered throughout this album that I believe Andy Foster is playing himself a lot on this record, and it's really strong. This Time is a more bright twinkling acoustic number, great catchy vocals, well written pop. Once again, Suffer No Longer, a more kind of ballad feel, very sweet mixture of piano and acoustic guitar. Going Under brings back those big 80s It Bites vibe, big sound with harmony vocals. Way Home, the title track, is a great slice of prog pop once again, with great vocals. Great soloing section between keyboards and guitars towards the end makes this piece soar even greater. They're just really cool little short slices of prog pop with great sounds, great production, and great playing. And it ends with this 15-minute style epic that kind of closes out the album. It starts kind of slow and understated with a darker kind of melody. It kind of moves through some different sections, but keeps this vibe for quite some time. Kind of some dreamy psychedelic sections with beautiful harmonies. Gives way to kind of a jazzy feel with great guitar leads and blistering sax solos. And then it gets a bit heavier towards the end, bringing in that kind of Frost feel, this kind of wall of sound vibe. With these poppier vocal hooks, and just as it gets going, it kind of closes itself out at the end of the record, so kind of leaves you wanting more. Like, it's a fairly short record, and it's like, gets you really excited and pumped, and then it ends, and it's like, man, I wish there was even more to explore and experience here. I almost wish that end epic kind of had one more section at the end that kind of brought it all home, had this big kind of anthemic, epic ending, but as it stands, it's just really fantastic, excellent prog pop music that I just really can't get enough of. I just think it's fantastic. Highly recommended if you like that style, because I think it's really well done. And for a debut especially, considering this is like a debut record, to do something this fantastic right out the gate just shows that there could be a lot more to come that's really exciting and could be a new artist or group to watch. So Kite Parade, please check that one out. Really great and fantastic. The last one I really want to give major focus to is Von Hertzen Brothers and their new album Red Alert in the Blue Forest. Now, Von Hertzen Brothers are a group that I've kind of struggled with in the past. I've heard them mentioned a lot in prog circles. They have a pretty long career at this point. They formed in 2000 and have just had a lot of different albums throughout this 20-year span or so. But they always kind of blur the lines between different styles. You know, they have a rock backbone, but pull in some poppier influences, but also some proggy influences, and make for this kind of eclectic stew. Sometimes I like things that are eclectic and have different styles and interests, but sometimes it can feel a bit messy and makes it hard for me to really nail down on what it is that the band is doing. And sometimes I feel that way a bit with Von Hertzen brothers, as I've always struggled to kind of nail down what they are. You know, they're kind of a chameleon, and they kind of blur the lines between this kind of modern rock, alternative, pop, and prog style that's just hard to decide where they belong and what I feel about them. But I really enjoy this new album. It has a lot of great stuff with a lot of different eclectic kind of influences, and goes through a lot of different styles and moods. The Day of Reckoning that starts the album has some cool harmonies. I love their harmonies. That's one really standout factor for the group, is these kind of pop-ish, kind of Beach Boys-esque kind of harmonies that they do that are just really great. And the production is really outstanding, really sounds really crystal clear and very modern. So it just starts with this really cool, good driving rock song before we move into Blue Forest that's more atmospheric and sparse. Maybe a little bit of an electronica flavor that comes into it as well, with some melancholy vocals. Maybe an industrial style vibe as the music gets a bit heavier, but then it breaks down to some beautiful ballad-esque strings and it gets more intense towards the end. It's just like a big journey of a song that goes through several different styles and moods, which I really like. The Promise is a great, fascinating song with a folk flavor. Then we get to Peace Patrol is a great poppy prog number with some catchy melodies and a strong beat. There's also some sax soloing and some brilliant guitar solos as well. Pirates of the Razaborgian is kind of this modern sea shanty jaunt, kind of with a little bit of electronica style over the top of this, which makes for a very different kind of experience than your typical like sea shanty you might expect. But I think it's really fascinating. And Northern Lights is another really standout track that kind of is atmospheric, leading to a kind of funky bass groove. And it's kind of a spacey atmospheric track that kind of reminds of Pink Floyd, and it builds on this big, expansive, triumphant note with a wall of sound and horns and tinkling keys and soaring guitars. Just really a eclectic listen with a lot of different styles, and it's kind of hard to nail down the kind of takeaway from the album or boil it down to one point of the album, but it's just very eclectic, and it has a lot of influences. It sounds really well. There's moments that are beautiful. There's moments that rock, and it just does it all. And they really have an interesting, unique style that I think should be celebrated. And so I definitely recommend checking it out to see what it's all about. And so I recommend that to you guys. Please check that one out as well. Finally, so that's the last major one, but I wanted to mention extremely briefly that I've also been enjoying this month the new Ghost album, Impera. Which, you know, is not really what I'd expect to be listening to a lot. I always had the wrong impression of Ghost, that it was this dark, like heavy death metal kind of feel because of the whole vibe and get up of the band. They wear these kind of costumes and face paint and all of this stuff, and they look like demons or skeletons or goblins or whatever you want to call it. So I've always been turned off a bit by that. I thought it was a little bit silly, a little bit over the top and too dark, and I don't really want to listen to something that's like satanic or evil sounding or anything like that. But then you take a listen. You know, I heard a lot of people recommend it and say it's really cool, and the sound is totally different from the image that the band portrays. You know, the sound is like this kind of big arena rock, kind of 80s hair metal style that's really poppy and really fun and energetic, and it's so interesting to me. I almost listen to it just because it's such an interesting experience. The image of the group versus what you're actually hearing on the record is just so disparate in my brain that I'm just so fascinated by that. If you're into like that kind of 80s arena rock, hair metal style, if you were ever turned off by the group's image and like, oh, this is going to be some like growling vocals, you know, heavy blast beats kind of stuff, it's not that at all. It's kind of this fun, big rock sound that has a lot of pop kind of sensibilities to it. It can be very catchy at times and is just really becomes a fun listen, kind of something like a Def Leppard or Whitesnake. You know, you get that kind of style of these kind of classic 80s big rock bands, and they really typify that sound. But if you're, you know, the lyrics can be a bit heavy and dark and anti-religion and things like that. You know, I want to be careful with recommending it to certain groups of people. I don't want to offend anyone with it, but you know, if you're into that style and you don't mind those kinds of lyrics that might be a bit controversial, that could be a little bit like kind of attacking organized religion and things, like some of the pitfalls of that, and so, you know, some moments in history and so forth. If you don't mind that and you're into that big 80s style arena rock, this might be something you wouldn't expect to be as fun as it is. So wanted to mention that here at the outset. And so that's basically what I've got for you guys. Those are the albums that spoke to me over the month. Pretty long, eclectic list of albums, I think, and I think there's something for everybody here. So I hope to be back with this style show at the end of April to cover all of the albums throughout April that I've been enjoying. And of course, there'll probably be some leftovers from March that I still have kind of on my list to check out, but haven't quite gotten to yet. So if there is an album that came out in March that you're like, oh, why didn't you cover this one? This was great. You know, it may be coming in the future, but, you know, mention it in the comments. Maybe it's one I just totally missed and didn't see. So I'd love to listen to any of your recommendations of albums that have come out in the last month or so that you guys have been liking. I'd love for this show to be kind of a ground for people to share the music that they've been enjoying in this past month. So please put that in the comments, the albums that have really grabbed you. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode and got some cool music recommendations from it. And I just hope you guys subscribe. Like I said, I try to cover almost all new prog albums that come out that are pretty notable. And I do these style new music shuffle shows each month to give you guys some great prog recommendations of albums that may have slipped through the cracks or that may be a bit more obscure that you may not have heard of. So please subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. I appreciate all the comments and the likes. And for my existing subscribers, you guys are amazing. And I hope to catch you guys in a future video. Please keep enjoying the music out there, whatever you got going on. That's what this show's all about. Just enjoying great music and bringing attention to these artists that deserve it, who are just so incredible and do such great work that often goes unnoticed. So thank you guys again, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.